Yalla, 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 la, 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 la. Yalla, la, 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 yalla, yalla, la, la, yalla, yalla, la, la, yalla, la, 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 la. Yalla, 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 la, la, yalla, la, 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 ya, ya. Return again, return again, return to the land of your soul. Return again, return again, return to the land of your soul. Return to who you are, return to what you are, return to where you are, born and reborn again. Return again, return again, return to the land of your soul. Hashivenu, Hashivenu, Adonai Elecha Ben Ashuva, Ben Ashuva. Chadish, Chadish, Yameinu kekedem. Yalla, la, la, yalla, 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 la, 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 yalla, 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 la, la. Yalla, la, 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 yalla. Hi, everyone. It's good to see you all here. Good to see faces, and I hope everyone is feeling all right. What a juicy evening we have in store for us. Oh yes, oh yes. Some of you may have registered for this without seeing the title yet, because I recently added that. So in case you missed it, this evening session we're going to call Malchuyot for Feminists and Atheists, Approaches to Divine Sovereignty for Those Who Struggle to Call God King. So that's what we have ahead of us. And before we get much further, in case you don't have the chat bar opened up, I invite you to do so, although I hope it doesn't become distracting for us, but hopefully it'll be a tool for us as we learn. And I want to just jump us right in. So you may know that on Rosh Hashanah in particular, oh goodness, I'm seeing that Ner Tamid may not have gotten the right link, so we're taking care of that. Thank you, Rabbi Shana. So you may know that on Rosh Hashanah in particular, it's considered to be a time when we, as the people of Israel, coronate God as our king. And in the special Musaf section of the prayers in the morning, we add special sections to the Rosh Hashanah liturgy by the names of Malchuyot, which means sovereignty or kingship, Zichronot, which means memory, and Shofarot, which is all about the shofar. So that structure of those three themes are going to be our themes for the 3 sessions of our Elul preparation classes that are being offered this year from the Southside Jewish Collaborative. And so tonight we're going to dive deeply into Malchuyot, kingship and sovereignty. And again, just welcome to everybody who's arriving. Welcome to people from all of our communities in the collaborative. So we're going to start with a prayer, looking into the text of a prayer, which is one of the centerpieces of the Rosh Hashanah liturgy. It comes from the Rosh Hashanah liturgy, but we may know it in another context because it has become so beloved that it got attached to daily prayers and Shabbat prayers. And I'm talking about the Elenu. So I'm going to share my screen now, and we can look at that. Oh, you know what? Before I do that, let's do something interactive first. So before I take us to that text, I want to just ask you, and I'm going to take the spotlight off myself and invite you to unmute and just jump in if you have a thought, or to use the chat bar. What are your associations with the word king? So before we go any further, just think for a moment, what do you associate with kings or with the word king? You can write those associations in the chat bar. You can unmute and say something. I invite you to speak up or share. Power, male, patriarchy, playing cards. Not always too bright, violence, old King Cole was a merry old soul. Any other? The British monarchy, male, apart from the people, authoritarian power. Any other? Pompous, divine right, Martin Luther King, red velvet and ermine, hereditary power, new nobility. I assume that's what that meant. Narcissist. King as a metaphor for a deity. Oh, here's a little thought. Is odd in that the most important thing a king has to do is to groom a successor. Interesting. All right. Well, so we can kind of sense here, I would say in our first ruthlessness, our first temperature check about how we feel about the idea of king, just the associations we have, a little bit negative. I'd say the overall tone is a little bit negative amongst this gathering. I'm not at all surprised, I have to say. We're Americans. We have a long history of, setting ourselves up in opposition to monarchies, right? And most of us, many of us here are feminists of one kind or another. And of course, the king is very male image. And yes, so there's a lot of challenge to many of us to use king as the metaphor by which we call out to what is holy. And so we're going to explore that. We're going to think a little more about what is challenging about that for some of us, what possible responses could be to handle the places in our prayer life where we find that God as king metaphor, how we can reconstruct that for ourselves if need be, and also to ask ourselves, what is the purpose of those sorts of prayers? What do we think they were intended? What was the intention behind them? Are there useful things about that metaphor? Are there ways in which that prayer language is pointing to something that we don't want to lose? Is there anything of value there? And what could that be? So that's sort of the direction we're going. As usual, if you've ever learned with me, you will know I brought way too much material for us. So we will have to see how far we get, but I don't want to lose that last piece of it. So I may get us there eventually by cutting some of the other parts off. So let's start with the text I was about to show you. Here it is, the Elenu. Okay, so here is the language, and as I mentioned, you may know this, but this liturgy, this prayer, was originally composed for Rosh Hashanah, for the High Holy Days, and then became so loved that it was imported into services for Shabbat and even the daily prayers. So if I can invite somebody to unmute and read in English for us, and just take us through at least the first section of this prayer. Just dive right in because I can't see everybody. Just go ahead and unmute and be brave. Somebody.
It is our obligation to praise the master of all, to ascribe greatness to the creator of the world in the beginning. We bow, prostrate ourselves, and offer thanks before the supreme King of Kings. The Holy One, blessed is he who spreads the heavens, who establishes the earth, and the seat of his glory is in the heaven above, and the abode of his invincible might is in the loftier heights. He is our King. Oh, he is our God. There is nothing else. Our King is true. All else is insignificant. As it is written in his Torah, and you shall know this day and take into your heart that Adonai is God in the heavens above and upon the earth below. There is nothing else.
All right. Thank you, Nerissa. So let's just look at that. You can take a moment to look at that text. Think about that text. You probably have it in your ears. Some of you, Elenu l'shabach l'Adon hakol latet gedula le'otzeh breshit. You might have it in your ear as Elenu l'shabach. It's the High Holy Day grand melody of the Elenu Hagadol. Take a look, see if there's something there that jumps out at you. Could be something you find particularly meaningful, something you find particularly challenging. It could be a feeling, a reaction. I'm going to stop the share in just a moment, so if you have need of looking at the text to get those questions and things that you notice, find those. I'm going to stop sharing, and then we will discuss, and we can look back at it again if need be. Does anyone have a comment? Any questions that arose, things you noticed, feelings that came up, anything like that? Yes. Anyone have a comment? Yes, Judy, go ahead.
Well, I have a recollection that this piece was put into the liturgy sometime in the Middle Ages or previous to that, when there was a lot of oppression and a lot of pogroms, and that it was, I think of it as propaganda, that, okay, you can slaughter us, but we have a king who beats all the kings and all the powers, and you owe the world to our king. And that it was a way of dealing with that powerlessness.
So the text was written before the medieval period. However, it may be that it was during the medieval period that it was popularized and taken from its original context in just the High Holy Liturgy and placed into the daily and weekly liturgy. But I think your point, I want to really, if I had a whiteboard, I would write it and circle it. One of the things you just said, which is that there's a context going on of what it means to declare that God is king and not any of the earthly powers that may or may not hold sway at any given time. I think that you just kind of took us right to my final point of the class, but so we'll come back to it. But I think what a radical idea. What an amazing idea to say that whoever's in power politically at any given time is not the true king. The true king is the King of Kings, is Adonai. What a radical and potentially threatening idea. All right, any other comments? I think I saw Rabbi Meira. Yeah.
The idea that there's, well, it's kind of saying what you said, but in a different way. But our lives, life and death, floods, hurricanes, fires, whatever, that's the ultimate power. That's the ultimate power, or redemption. Being freed from Egypt, or when something turns for the better in our lives. It's not, or the fact that we got born, the idea that the earthly powers just don't compare with the life and death ability. And if we could say a person type was the person who created that, the creator of all, that's what I think of it.
Thank you. All right, and I saw here a comment from Robin, which I think is beautiful. That there, she may not resonate with the king images, but the Ein Od, there is none else, is very Taoist and monist, and indeed, I think that the the mystical view of this prayer is really that when we say there is nothing else, it's not just sort of saying, oh, God's the only thing that matters. It's saying actually God is the only thing that is, that actually there is some great unity that is beyond our understanding, that really there is only God, period. And, full stop. Us, this is a separateness is an illusion. Robin, did you want to add anything there?
Yeah, but I would say I think it's going down a dead end to be so anthropocentric. I think the king images, which maybe were very useful long ago, are holding us back now. And so to me, and I think that's sort of where Taoism was in many ways, but also monism and Judaism, as I understand it, going more toward it. So we don't need it to be a king. We're looking at the whole world that breathes, the forest, the plants, the ocean, us, that we are all one and there is nothing else.
Yes. So I'm going to actually jump from your comment to another text which has a similar thing to say, and then we'll keep going back to our discussion. So if you had another comment, don't worry, we're not done sharing. So let me get back to our texts here. This next piece I want to show you, I'm going to jump us to Judith Plaskow, standing again at Sinai. So she is one of our very important feminist Jewish thinkers. And we'll skip the first paragraph, which is basically saying, don't worry if we're criticizing this idea of God as king. We're not criticizing God. We're just criticizing this metaphor. Don't get too excited. That's the point of her first paragraph. Then the second paragraph kind of goes deeper on one of these points that you made, Robin. Would somebody like to read it for us, the second paragraph here, starting with metaphors for God?
Metaphors for God that might once have been compelling despite or because of their political resonance not only have lost their immediacy and power, but have become morally suspect and disturbing, especially those images of God drawn from political and family life have changed in their associations and meanings with the changes in and new perspectives on the family and political order. Once images become socially, politically, or morally inadequate, however, they are also religiously inadequate. Instead of pointing to and invoking the reality of God, they block the possibility of religious experience.
Thanks, Margot. So I think, I've at Or Shalom, many of you are a part of our ongoing conversation that we call the Considering God Salon. And part of where that whole conversation came from was recognizing that for many of us, liturgy and other of the trappings of organized Jewish religion were not serving their intended purpose, that were, perhaps even becoming obstacles to religious experience. And so Plaskow here is just naming, I think, something that that many of us feel, not everybody, of course, but that is, I think, very widespread in our world, that when we use these metaphors that are problematic given our contemporary political landscape and science and so on and so forth, the progress we've made, our liturgy has a big lag time and doesn't, continue to evolve at the same pace. And sometimes that means we have this liturgy blocking religious experience, which is exactly the opposite of what it was intended to do. So before we move on, does anyone else want to make a comment or ask a question? Betsy, go ahead.
One of the associations of the word God to me, or king, of the word king and God in using that language, is fear. And I think that's right now one of the most powerful things that's used to manipulate people in this day and age. So it's just, and then people who say they are speaking for God, or they're God is giving messages to them, to pass on to people, whatever. So again, I mean, looking, it's always important to look at where it came from at the time, and to also recognize how it's being used in all the religions, most of the religions now, because there is just so much. I don't know. I don't really have any other. I mean, that's the main point I wanted to say is the association of king and God in a certain concept, and fear and voting and yeah.
Yeah, I think that association is true for many. Any other comments?
There's something that bothers me even more than the king part of it, and that's I don't know what to call it, the separation. And the first thing we looked at really emphasizes this separation, that it's heaven, but above heaven. And that's more troubling to me than anything. And
All right. Any other comments before we continue? So I want to bring one more contemporary source to us. This is from a rabbi colleague and friend of mine who wrote an article that I highly recommend. It's called God in Metaphor, A Guide for the Perplexed by Rabbi Toba Spitzer. And I'm going to read it because it's quite lengthy here, and I'll try to take us through. But so she says, for many people, attending High Holy Day services is a bit like going to a play where you really don't like the main character, where much of the time you doubt the very existence of the main character. If the main character in our traditional High Holy Day liturgy is God, this can be quite a problem for anyone seeking a meaningful spiritual experience. Many of the dominant images of divinity that we encounter during these days of awe, God as king, as the power over who will live and who will die, as Heavenly Father, fail to resonate with or actually repel many contemporary Jews. We're then left either to suspend our disbelief, be happy that we can't understand the Hebrew, or just close our eyes and enjoy the music in order to make it through. And I know that there are some for whom that's true, some maybe not. But here's the heart of the matter. What I've come to understand in recent years is that the God problem that so many people have, the difficulty of believing in or even taking seriously the notion of some kind of all-powerful, all-knowing being that interacts with us in mysterious ways, is not really a problem with God. Rather, it's a reaction to a metaphor, or a set of metaphors that have come to dominate our thinking about God. So there's the God, and then there's the how we think about God. And again, just like Plaskow, Rabbi Spitzer here is saying those are not the same thing. Let's not get confused. To make real use of our liturgy, it is helpful to remember that the words in our prayer book were written as poetry, as evocative metaphors to foster certain mind states and attitudes in those who interact with them. Instead of asking, do I believe this? We can ask of a prayer, where is this trying to take me? Metaphors like king and creator of the universe are intended to help us feel our own relative smallness in relation to the cosmos, to invoke a sense of humility and service, while at the same time suggesting that there is something in the vastness that both cares about us and holds us accountable. The metaphor of parent speaks to an experience of returning home, of coming back to that which loves and accepts us. So when we're saying Avinu Malkeinu, we're saying our Father, our King. So that's why she's raising the parent here. As with any metaphors, we need to remember that these are not definitions of God. They are poetic entryways into an experience of something both within and around us. So I want to go back to this bolded sentence here. Oh, goodness. Didn't work. Oh, there we are. Instead of asking, do I believe this? We can ask of a prayer, where is this trying to take me? So I want to ask again another reflective question. Has anyone had a powerful experience while, first smaller circle, while listening to or being a part of the Elenu Hagadol during High Holy Days? That's the prayer where in traditional circles at Or Shalom, I don't know what happens in other communities that are here tonight, but we actually do a physical prostration. We lay ourselves down on the ground. Has anyone had a powerful experience, positive or negative, experiencing that prayer that they're willing to share? If you are, just go ahead and unmute and I'll try to spotlight you. Okay.
My reaction to that is, no way. I'm not going to prostrate myself.
Mm-hmm.
No,
So
that's
that,
just doesn't feel right. So that's me.
so a powerful negative feeling. Okay. Any other experiences? Corey.
Well, I had one. Usually I don't do the prostration because I'm on the bima with all the microphone cords and clarinets and everything. But last year in my home studio, there I was by myself and did the prostration, and it was quite powerful and helped me. I would say I acted like the weeping child in that sense. I've been suffering a conundrum within myself for a long time over particular issues in relation to my effect on other people through my work. And that just hung in me like a cloud. And that moment, of course, it also had the build up to it and what happened before it in the service. But that moment in the service gave me the opportunity to release some strong emotion that helped move me forward in this conundrum in a way that would not have, I don't think would have been possible had I not been there lying face down on the ground in that posture.
I think
Thank you
it's
for
the power of embodied spirituality, which is it's a wonderful series that we're doing. And personally, I do that and enjoy it and feel like if I do sun salutations, and when I enter a Buddhist or Taoist temple, as a respect, if I do a prostration, let me do a prostration here. And I enjoy that part of embodied spirituality.
Yeah, I've also done that. I did that. I was studying Buddhism for several years. And at first I felt very uncomfortable doing that as part of a number of Buddhist things. But after a while, and now doing it in services, it feels like an expression of both humility and being a small part of everything. And I like that feeling very much.
Rabbi Katie? This is fascinating. Thank you so much. I love that moment because if Rosh Hashanah is, as we declare it to be, the birthday of the world, it's a moment to literally give the earth a hug. I realize, I know we're in a building and, well, actually now we're in many places, but there is something at least from the heart, like skin to skin, as it were, which is so powerful with newborns. And all of us need that touch so much. And I love that idea that today the world is pregnant, or it's the birthday of the world, however we use that language. And it's just a moment to physically connect with the earth, the creation of which, we are its children as well. And just that moment to connect with it, I always find very powerful.
I love that. Skin to skin with planet Earth. Any others?
I've done that a number of times at the UU in the service, and I haven't experienced it as emotionally and as spiritually as some of our other folks have talked about. But what I have felt is that it's just a kinship with the other religions who do that, like feeling like, oh, this is what Muslims do, and this is what, you see so many different other religions, Buddhists, where they go all the way down on the ground. I feel more of a kinship, sort of a feeling of kinship with some of our other brothers and sisters who worship differently than we do generally.
To me, it represents the feeling of renunciation or release of self. So you let all of that go, and then you're open to experiencing this bigger scene of creation.
Other comments? Just go ahead and jump right in. All right, we can keep looking further. So let's look at another prayer, which is heavy on the God King imagery, and this is, a familiar favorite. So let me just share with you again. We're gonna scroll back up to the Adonolam. Okay, so would someone read for us in English?
The king of the world who ruled before any creature was created. At the time they were made, all was according to his will, and then his name was called King. And after everything was finished, he alone ruled, awe-inspiring. He was, he is, and he will be with splendor. And he was first, with no second, to rule over him or to collaborate. With no beginning and no end, he has the strength and the right. And he is my God, my Redeemer is alive, the rock who sustains me in a distressful day. And he is my banner and refuge, the portion of my cup on the day I call out. In his hand I safeguard my spirit, for when I sleep, I know that I will wake. And with my spirit is my body. God is for me, and I will not be afraid.
Thank you for that. I have a little story that some of you may have heard me tell about this prayer. It was sunset on election day this past fall. So almost a year ago now, when the stakes were incredibly high and there was so much worry and anxiety and so much hope about what might be. And I had spent most of the day just kind of not allowing myself to really get attached to the possibility that the person I wanted might win that election. But then in the final hour, I kind of went out of my house to go look at the sun setting, and I had the thought, I could be watching the sunset on the last day before the tide is about to change, before this great decision gets made. And I came home and was just filled with that feeling. And then I sort of realized that I was caught up in this question of this king or that king, this earthly king, that earthly king. But really, no matter what happened in the grand arc of things, perhaps there were powers and the King of Kings who were in charge no matter what outcome happened. And I started playing this version of Adon Olam that I love, and just singing and dancing with all my might. And what lifted me then wasn't the thought, oh, maybe my guy will win. That what lifted me was thinking, there are powers that even the worst human bad guys on earth can't overcome. There are powers that are beyond our imagining, that are at play, governing in ways that we can't even conceive of. And that thought was so powerful that it just it freed me. It was so freeing to really just sort of connect with the idea that whatever earthly king or pharaoh was in charge wasn't really in charge of the whole universe, after all. And that's what I get from Adon Olam. Any other comments, questions, reactions, thoughts before we move on to the next thing? All right, I don't see anyone. Oh, I see Miriam. Yes, go ahead.
Just that I think Rabbi Katie actually knows this. This is always both my mother's and my father's and my favorite. And I think it has to do less with the idea of these being the attributes of the king, even of God maybe, but the idea of an infinite, eternal sense of no end, no beginning, of the things that are constant, and to me, I know both of my parents loved it, but to me, it's like the evidence of the constant love of my family. And even though we can't trace our family back really far, but just like an unbroken line of the important things that held us together, that still hold us together, even though they're gone. And it's that unity of spirit that this expresses to me.
Yeah, I thank you for picking up on some particular pieces of that poetic liturgical language about Adonai Malach, Adonai Melech, Adonai Malach, Adonai Yimloch Le'olam Vaed. God ruled and rules, will rule, did rule. It's this eternity of, and that the way Adon Olam expresses it about, before time itself, really, that just trying to stretch our minds to that vast scale of time and space, as big as we can imagine, and as tiny as we can imagine too. Just the infinitude and the infinitesimalitude of our universe, and sort of sensing our smallness in relation to that is somehow important in figuring out our place. And then also connecting with those things that defy some of our greatest limitations, like you were saying, that love really does conquer death in so many real ways, that we are mortal and we can't get around that, but love does continue even between ourselves and those who are no longer with us in body. And that is powerful stuff. That there really are very powerful forces at play that move through our lives, that are beyond our making and that are beyond our control. Other comments? All right. Well, let's keep going then. Let me take us back to our text sheet. Okay, so we're going to take a slight turn now. So there is a lot of High Holy Day liturgy that talks about God as king. And in the Malchuyot section, actually, let me show you one thing first. There are a whole bunch of quotations. So if you are reading through the entire Machzor, the High Holy Day prayer book, you will see in the Malchuyot section probably a number of quotations that mention God as king in different ways. So we have things like Adonai Melech, Adonai Malach, Adonai Yimloch Le'olam Va'ed. We have Adonai Yimloch Le'olam Va'ed here in Exodus. And then we have this piece which I want to hone in on, and this is, beginning to get to that issue I brought up at the beginning and that I want to make sure we talk about. So here, this is again in the middle of the Musaf section, and we're talking about mortality, and we're talking about, God being so beyond us, and in the midst of all that, there's this piece which, we don't, at Or Shalom, we don't say this out loud, and it may not even be in our version of the prayer book, but I love to find it as I was preparing. Wretched mortal king, he decays and descends to the grave, into the lower world and beneath. He toils without satisfaction. How long will he reign, this wretched king? Sleep overtakes him, deep slumber overcomes him, he is crushed with desolation. How long will he reign? But the Most High King, his power is forever. His glory is forever. His praise endures forever. Forever will he reign. And I just imagine, can you imagine the chutzpah of saying those words out loud? Imagine yourself in medieval Europe when there actually was a wretched king. Imagine the power of a community coming together to say these words. When any kind of tyrant is in charge. It really is, it's about something that has implications for us in our world and the way that we relate to whatever the mortal powers that be may be. So any comments before I move on from there? Okay, I don't see any.
Wow.
Okay.
That's my comment. Wow.
Wow, it's sudden.
I never saw that before. It must not be in our Reconstructionist.
It's that, yeah, this was from Safaria. This was not, this was one of those, and this is actually, I'm glad we're sitting here talking, Meira. The Reconstructionist prayer book, it's gigantic, but it includes a lot of very contemporary pieces, and it's cut out a lot of more traditional pieces. And in general, I think that makes it more accessible and meaningful. And every once in a while, it means that there's the loss of something that is very interesting, like this little piece here about the wretched mortal king. How long will he reign? How long is that guy going to reign? Nothing compared to Hakadosh Baruch Hu, nothing. So, where I'm going with this is, now I want to show you a couple of pieces from our Torah and other parts of the Bible, which talk about kings, and, well, you'll see. Okay, let's take a look here. So I love this next piece. This is from the first book, here we are, from the first book of Samuel, chapter 8. When Samuel grew old. Now, who's Samuel? Samuel is a prophet. Okay, so this is in the period the Israelites have had all their adventures in the Torah. They're now in the Promised Land, and this is during the period that's called the period of the Judges, right? So they don't have a king yet, and Samuel is a prophet. So when Samuel grew old, the same Samuel who is the son of Hannah, who we read about on Rosh Hashanah. Okay, when Samuel grew old, he appointed his sons judges over Israel. The name of his firstborn son was Joel, and his second son's name was Abijah, and they sat as judges in Beersheba. But his sons did not follow in his ways. They were bent on gain. They accepted bribes, and they subverted justice. All the elders of Israel assembled and came to Samuel at Ramah, and they said to him, "You have grown old, and your sons have not followed your ways. Therefore, appoint a king for us to govern us like all the other nations." So they're saying, look, your sons are corrupt. Give us a king. Everyone else is doing it. Why don't we get a king? Samuel was displeased that they said, "Give us a king to govern us." Of course, it doesn't say he was upset that it was his own kids who they were complaining about. No, well, that wasn't what upset him. What upset him was that they had this idea of a king. Samuel prayed to God, to Adonai, and Adonai replied to Samuel, "Heed the demand of the people in everything they say to you, for it is not you that they have rejected. It is me that they have rejected as their king." This is God talking. "Like everything else they've ever done since I brought them out of Egypt to this day, forsaking me and worshiping other gods, so they are doing to you. Heed their demand, but warn them solemnly and tell them about the practices of any king who will rule over them." Samuel reported all the words of Adonai to the people who were asking him for a king. He said, "This will be the practice of the king who will rule over you. He will take your sons and appoint them as his charioteers and horsemen, and they will serve as outrunners for his chariots. He will appoint them as his chiefs of thousands and of fifties, and they will have to plow his fields, reap his harvests, and make his weapons and the equipment for his chariots. He will take your daughters as perfumers, cooks, and bakers. He will seize your choice fields, vineyards, and olive groves and give them to his courtiers. He will take 1/10 part of your grain and vintage and give it to his eunuchs and courtiers. He will take your male and female slaves, your choice young men and your asses, and put them to work for him. He will take 1/10 part of your flocks, and you shall become his slaves. The day will come when you cry out because of the king whom you yourselves have chosen, and Adonai will not answer you on that day." So this is the warning from Samuel to the people who want a king. But the people wouldn't listen to Samuel's warning. No, they said, "We must have a king over us that we may be like all the other nations. Let our king rule over us and go out at our head and fight our battles." Everyone else has one, Mom. Everyone else is doing it. They have a king. We want a king. When Samuel heard that all that the people had said, he reported it to Adonai, and Adonai said to Samuel, "Heed their demands and appoint a king for them." Samuel then said to the men of Israel, "All of you go home." So we have this little tidbit in the midst of the book of Samuel of God's feelings about human kings. Any comments, any thoughts? So let's put that into our blender here. We're taking all these different sources. We have these texts about God as king. What happens when people get a kingly, mortal king? Any thoughts?
Pretty much accurate.
Yeah, I think that warning is founded in reality, right? When you get kings, you get corruption, you get taxes, you get wars. Anything else?
Well, I think it starts out as good, but it can go really bad. And it started out a little bit of Saul, okay, made a mistake. David, Solomon, and then from then on, it was downhill. So at the beginning, people say, "Oh, see how this works," but it doesn't work very long.
Mm-hmm. Any other comments?
I really appreciated the desire for, in times of trouble, where there is injustice, people want an authoritarian a lot, and certainly in those days, and and even now, you get a little bit of
Definitely.
ruffle a little bit of ruffle in the social fabric or a big ruffle in the social fabric. And everyone wants is someone to make it simple and tell them what to do. And so I think that that's a great kind of a basic desire of people.
Yeah, it's really interesting how the more things change, the more they stay the same. That we, here we are in this moment so many years after this text was written, thousands of years later, and people still are people. People still have this fantasy of some righteous, authoritarian, strongman leader that's going to save them and protect them and, sort of make things right. And that's playing out all over our world right now. Yes, Margot.
Yeah, that it seems to me like there's what you have is some sons who are not doing the right thing. And instead of saying, okay, we've got some sons who are not doing the right thing, let's appoint some other sons. They're going, okay, here's two guys who are not doing well, let's completely change the system. To me, it's like not confronting the actual problem and coming up with the simplest solution you could to that problem. It's like going in a whole other direction. So that's one thing. And the other thing is this whole dramatic monologue about how bad it's going to be. They're going to take a 10th part of everything. The Levite priest did too. And any normal functioning government that has a taxation system is going to do the same thing. So it's described as if it's some kind of horrible thing, but it's actually just the cost of governing. So those are my two comments.
Thank you. Any others? All right, I don't see any others at the moment. So we have these urges of people who, may be facing whatever difficulties. Maybe they're facing a particular corrupt leader. Maybe there is uncertainty of one sort or another. Then there's this longing for a king. I just want to note one other thing in that text, which was God's reaction, that, God wasn't happy about it and was taking it very personally, right? It's the people are rejecting me, that, I'm actually their king, and they're deciding that they need this intermediary, that they need some kind of human king, when really all they need is me. And, that I think it's wonderful to think of God being, so person-like. I mean, it can be a difficulty for people to think of God that way, but I love these super person-like moments where, we imagine that God's feelings were hurt, and that we can imagine that the divine plan for this perfect society in the Holy Land is, it's not going the way God intended, that there was supposed to be just, God and the Torah and the system set up by the Torah and sacred society, like no need for the king. However, there is a provision for kings in the Torah. So let's just take a look at that for just a moment. So in Deuteronomy, we predict that moment in Samuel. So if after you've entered the land that Adonai your God has assigned to you and taken possession of it and settled in it, you decide, I will set a king over me, as do all the nations about me, you shall be free to set a king over yourself. Of course, it has to be one that is chosen by Adonai your God. And where that comes in our Samuel story is, of course, that the prophet names the king to be. Be sure to set as king over yourself one of your own people. You must not set a foreigner over you, one who's not your kinsman. Moreover, he shall not keep many horses, or send people back to Egypt to add to his horses, since Adonai has warned you, you must not go back that way again. And he shall not have many wives, lest his heart go astray. Nor shall he amass silver and gold to excess. When he's seated on his royal throne, he shall have a copy of this teaching written for him on a scroll by the Levitical priests. Let it remain with him, and let him read in it all his life, so that he may learn to revere Adonai his God, to observe faithfully every word of this teaching, as well as these laws. Thus he will not act haughtily toward his fellows, or deviate from the instruction to the right or to the left, to the end that he and his descendants may reign long in the midst of Israel. So, not too many horses, not too many wives, and reading the Torah every day, reminding yourself that you are not the ultimate authority. What do you see there? Any other thoughts, questions?
You see Solomon.
Yes. Right. So I think that's very insightful. And, scholars do point that out, that perhaps, there are academics who would say this text was written after King Solomon, and that it was a reaction to King Solomon, perhaps. But in the traditional view of the Torah, it's sort of, before Solomon. But yes, a man who had many wives. And I see a comment here: humility is elusive and very essential for any human ruler. Yeah, so we're setting up this system where there can be a king. God doesn't like it. It's not the preferred form of government according to God. However, it's permitted. If we have to be like everyone else and have a king just like everyone else, but our king is not supposed to be an absolute monarch. Our king is not supposed to be a dictator. Our king is supposed to be someone who has limits set by the King of Kings, right? And Margot saying the king over the King of Kings. Yes. So it's setting up the Torah in these two texts, and in all of those liturgical texts that are so thorny and so challenging to us as Americans who've grown up our whole lives saying kings are bad, we're not supposed to have a king. I'm not going to bow down to any king. I don't like kings, or to those of us who say, why are you trying to tell me that God is a man? I know that the divine is beyond that. So all these reasons we have to reject, to reconstruct, to forget all those pieces of the liturgy. Here's the thing I wanted to say before we end, which is just that if we were to just completely take all that stuff away and not wrestle with it and replace it with stuff that's more comfortable, like let's just call God wellspring of wisdom or something like that, or source of life. Let's never call God king. Let's take out all that stuff. Then we throw away this radical chutzpahdik thing in the heart of our religious tradition, which says that human kings are still, as powerful as they might be, they are still not our king. We have some greater power to whom we are accountable. You can say that in lots of ways that are not the metaphor of God as king. But I think if we wrestle with that deeply, we come to this pretty radical conclusion. And I'm just amazed to imagine our ancestors through long stretches of history where there were human kings, or in places and at times where there were human mortal tyrants in charge, every year declaring together, those wretched mortal kings, how long will they reign? We are worshiping the King of Kings. Our king is king over that king. That is so powerful, so radical, and so threatening. And I suspect it's not not coincidence that the Jewish people have not always been beloved by monarchs and tyrants. And, we have been, it's true that theology, the idea that even a king of flesh and blood has to read the book that's written by the King of Kings who's actually in charge, that is pretty challenging to any mortal tyrant that comes along. And very, very much establishing a culture and a tradition of people who might be willing to challenge whatever a tyrant comes along and unjustly decrees. So, comments, questions, challenges. Rabbi Katie, that's crazy. I don't like God as king. Let's just go back to the wellspring of wisdom. Thoughts?
Well, it's sort of like saying there's something greater than us, and even something greater than the greatest of us.
Yes.
That humans, there's something so much bigger.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, I find this very, very interesting, because it really is a radical idea. I'd never thought of God equals king, which is definitely, that more, more powerful than just plain old kings. And it could be like a reason why there's anti-Semitism too.
Yeah.
Because other people would look at us and say, well, those Jews, man, they're not going to go for, the powers that be in this world. They have their heads someplace else,
Very threatening. Very threatening.
Very threatening.
Yeah.
I think that I just had this thought based on what people have said and what you just talked about. Hadn't thought it before, that I think a lot of other religions and people try to bring God or gods down to a human level and enclose God and sort of depower God. But this is like, God is bigger than we know. There are things we don't understand. As humans, we have limitations. And this is recognizing that there are things beyond our understanding, things beyond our abilities. And that, like, the brain, the human brain, there is so much more there than we are able to actually understand. And that's like a metaphor. God is almost like a metaphor for that. There is so much more there than it, and it's so much bigger than us, that God as king is a metaphor for how much more there is than we can as human beings know.
Yes. Yes, very much so. And that makes me think, I want to just go back to that paragraph I skipped earlier from Plaskow. Where is it? So criticism of received images of God is not, of course, criticism of God. It is criticism of ways of speaking about a reality that in its full reality is finally unknowable. Everything we say about God represents our human efforts to create, recapture, and evoke experiences of God sustained within linguistic and cultural frameworks that already color our experience and interpretation. All of our images have an as if or as it were in front of them that reminds us they are to be taken neither literally nor as final, but as part of an ongoing quest for language. Because after all, if God is really God, none of us could understand and completely define and capture in language what that reality is. King is one way, not the only way, so many other ways, and none of them adequate. None of them actually able to get to the boundaries of what we're talking about, because ultimately, if it's really divine, it's beyond language. So I think, does anyone have any final wrapping up thoughts before I really wrap us up for good? I see happy hands. I don't see thoughts. All right. So, I know that it's evening. It's not traditional to sound the shofar in the evening, but I am almost certain that there are some of us here who have not heard the shofar today. And it is, of course, a mitzvah to sound the shofar, to listen to the shofar every day that's not Shabbat, of Elul, the month that we are in. So I am going to say the blessing for listening to the shofar, which is our blessing formula, followed by Lishmoa Kol Shofar. And then I will sound the shofar for us. It is customary to stand when you're hearing the shofar. So if you're able to stand, I invite you to do so. And you can say amen to the blessing or not, as you wish. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu, lishmoa kol shofar. All right. You may be seated, and I am going to remind you, and thank you, Shayna is also reminding you, that this is the first part of a 3-part series. So you are most welcome to join us next week for Zichronot, Remembrance, August 24th at 7 p.m. I believe each community is publishing those Zoom links. And I think the next one, is that you, Rabbi Shayna, for the next one? Okay.
Yeah, Rabbi Katie, you are a tough act to follow, but it's my pleasure to do so. That was amazing. Thank you. Thank you.
Wonderful. So I hope everybody, well, I thank you, Rabbi Shayna, for coming tonight. It means a lot to me. And everybody's welcome to come. There's also, no doubt, many programs in each of our communities that are happening during this month. I know at Or Shalom, tomorrow we have our next Considering God Salon, which is that conversation ongoing about some of these kinds of thorny issues. And I believe the theme is about anti-Semitism. And again, 3 weeks from now, we have our third in the series for the Southside Collaborative. And on the 25th, Or Shalom's also having a workshop on writing with me and Charlie Barron. So lots of stuff to get us ready for these holidays. And I just wish everybody health and safety. Please take care of yourselves well. Please take care of each other well. Continue to do all of those important practices. If you haven't been vaccinated, please go get vaccinated. Wear masks. All of those cautionary behaviors that really are going to keep all of us in a better place. And Shana Tova, everybody. I hope that everybody has a meaningful Elul and moves into this season of High Holy Days with open hearts, and that we all help each other to have meaningful experiences, even though this year remains very untraditional, unconventional, and unexpected. So I hope all of us can find meaning in whatever places we find ourselves for the holidays. And Shana Tova, everybody.
Shana Tova.